Great, thank you. And I was told that I could put together a slide or two if I wanted to, so I hope it's okay. I have a couple of things I want to hit on. I'll go through these very quickly. Otis earlier this morning talked about this concept of efficacy, which is how well does the test work, and then effectiveness is how well does it work in the real world. Well, I would say the real world can be changed. It's not just that we throw this out into the wild, that we can have some control over the real world. So the question is, how can we structure that real world to make it work as well as possible? If we think about our overall goal is consistent, excellent performance, and how do we do that across a wide variety and large geographical scale? And there are several elements. A few of them include technical skills, so facility with the details at that very, the very detailed level. Do the people have the ability to know to do the measurements and characterization and so forth? And this is increasingly a challenge as our capabilities, our technologies, and our sophistication advances. So there are tools that are coming. We'll discuss this further, reminders, decision support, and hard stops, and so forth. But that will not obviate the need, as we've discussed at length, to have better and more sophisticated knowledge, so understanding of the concepts. So that gets to education, training, feedback, and coaching. But one thing we haven't discussed, that is the concept of buy-in with the professionals with whom we're engaging. Do they agree with the approach? Is there a sense of a fair process, or do we go down the path of restricting practice? So that's something that we're going to have to work through. So as I see it, the fundamental problem is that expertise is never uniform among individuals. It's never uniform within a single individual across all domains, and it's never uniform over time. So how do we structure our practices then to overcome those challenges? And I would say our current practices, for the most part, are not adequate for the challenges that are very quickly approaching. Radiologists generally work in parallel, meaning that radiologists will generally pick up a report and then they will provide the report, and that's it. And there are some mechanisms for second reads and so forth, but those are relatively informal for the most part. Practices tend to either use a specialist or a generalist model. As Hetty mentioned, we are moving more towards specialization, although even given what we need, the level of specialization, as you can see, is not, it's a generalist model. So we need to figure out how to balance those. We have extremely limited supervision and monitoring of physician practice. Peer review is something that has come out in the past, about a decade and a half ago. I would say that the evidence is showing that it is extremely limited in its effectiveness, in fact, pretty much zero. I term that the bad apple model of improvement. Just find the bad apples and get rid of them, and it's not effective, and it's not the right approach to take anyway. And I think a fundamental underlying principle to this is this concept of professional autonomy versus individual autonomy. In other words, do I have the right to practice however I want, or should there be some supervision and some accountability that I have within my practice? So some key drivers that I think that we need to figure out as a profession, as multiple professions. How do we, again, balance specialization versus generalization? We had Bruce especially spoke to that very well earlier. How do we ensure appropriate individual expertise? So some concepts I think we should be thinking about. How do we move from the concept of a bunch of expert individuals to expert organizations? In other words, the expertise resides within the organization, and the organization is deft at moving the content to the individual or to the place that it needs to get. So it's a focus on the organization rather than just individuals. I believe it probably starts with holding whole practices accountable collectively as a practice, and then there will probably have to be some blended model of generalization versus subspecialization, where you see specialists supervise, provide feedback, and coaching. So I think this is, I was the one in the back with tears in my eyes when I saw the great work being done at the Brigham with peer learning. I think that it's not only then moving from peer review to peer learning, but it's about feedback, learning, and then improvement and oversight and monitoring. I believe there needs to be a much more deliberate focus on teamwork, collaboration, and collegiality, and we're going to talk about that, I know, later. But those are three different things, and we need to be sophisticated about how we address that. I see that the tools and reminders, the technology is only a part of the comprehensive effort that we need to undertake. and that we need a strategic approach when to decide or when we focus on technical skill versus knowledge versus buy-in. And then the final thing I would say is Hetty said this morning that this is about a convergence of the life sciences, physical sciences, and engineering, which I think is completely accurate. But I would also add we've got to include the organizational sciences, and if we don't do that, then I think this will fail. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, David. And next, Dana.